George Costello.
Yeah, just curl up underneath there.
George?
Yeah.
Where's George?
So members, senior management staff, I see that we have quorum for this August 22nd meeting for policy and priorities. I hereby call it to order. First of all, does anyone have any, on council, have pecuniary interest to declare?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay. There we go. Yep, okay, call to order, and here we go, adoption of credit, or adoption of agenda. Sorry. So, after viewing the agenda, does anyone have any,
Motion to adopt the agenda.
oh, okay. The agenda for the August 22nd regular meeting of policy is adopted as circulated. Any discussion? Okay. That's it. Now we go to pecuniary interest.
So you can call the question on here?
Oh.
All those in favor of adopting the
Oh, yeah.
agenda?
Okay, I'm half asleep here. All those in favor of accepting the agenda as circulated? Yes. Okay, we're good. No, that's circulated. There we go, carried. Okay, now, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Any member of council have anything to declare?
None, Mr. Chair.
No?
No.
None, Mr.
No,
Chair.
Mr. Chair.
New business. So, now I just read this, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's being put forward by a motion by by Councillor Papp that Policy and Priorities Committee receive this report for information as it pertains to a summary of the proposed changes to provincial plans, and further that committee direct planning staff to continue to collaborate with the region to provide comments to the province as it relates to Dr. Menzies' Fonthill, Kame, and Z in the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and that the density and infill targets in the outer ring municipalities be distinguished from the density and infill targets in the inner ring within the proposed in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And further, that the specific request for the removal of 205 Highway 20 West from the Greenbelt Plan be referred to the province for consideration, and further, that this report be forwarded to the region of Niagara. Comments and discussion. Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to our planner. I have a number of questions. So one of the changes that's proposed within the Greenbelt plan speaks to net zero communities with respect to carbon footprint, et cetera. Have staff looked at this and what the impact of that is on our community and on our developments, or is that something we'll be doing as the years move forward, as we move forward? How are we going to evaluate that even, I wonder?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, there are certainly a number of things in both the Greenbelt Plan, Growth Plan, that the province has indicated to us that they're going to be coming out with technical papers in terms of what these mean. Certainly the whole concept around net zero communities is one of those. So they want the policies in the growth plan go to 2041, and by that time we are to be achieving some of these things that they're referring to. And net zero communities is one of those items. So exactly what that will look like and how we will get there, I do not know and can't provide you with any substantive guidance at this point in time. The province did indicate that they would be having some technical papers coming out. Many of these are not coming out until 2017 and 18. And so as they release these things, we'll be able to better inform you as to what some of the implications are. Some of them have to do with the coming up with the excess land strategy for dealing with excess land in our urban boundaries. Another one is with respect to what agricultural impact assessments look like and what's to be dealt with those. And then there's also a number of these climate change initiatives that the province has introduced in both the growth plan and the Greenbelt plan, and net zero communities is one of those, so.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The review also speaks to watershed planning. Now, will that be left to lower tier municipalities like ours, or will it be thrust upon the region to do a regional watershed planning process?
Mr. Chair, through you, these are some of the discussions we're having with our partners at the region and all the local municipality planning. Staff are meeting to review these things and have these conversations, and certainly watershed planning is one of those elements. And if it's to be done at the local level, it provides, it's a significant resource issue for us because it's a different type of expertise and resource. If it's done at the regional plan level and scale, makes a bit more sense because watersheds tend to cross municipal jurisdictions and boundaries. Currently, the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority has done some watershed planning on some of the watersheds. Again, this is an area where the province has indicated they are going to be releasing some technical papers with respect to watershed planning and what that needs to all consider. There's some question with respect to whether or not some of the watershed plans that have been undertaken by the MPCA, whether or not they'll meet these provincial requirements. So again, it's something I don't have a definitive answer for at this time, but it is something that is certainly a concern to local municipalities and regional planning staff in terms of how are we going to resource some of these things, because it will have an implication for all municipalities.
Thank you, Madam Director. Again,
May I continue,
Councillor
Mr. Chair?
Kersey?
I have a couple of other questions, Madam Director. One of the things that impacted our community with the Greenbelt was when we were trying to provide fire services to communities that, for the most part, lay in the Greenbelt, and we really struggled to try and find some properties. And I think part of our comments to the ministry was that they should be looking at that policy to be able to provide essential services such as fire protection. Have we had has the plan been updated to recognize that and acknowledge that?
Mr. Chair, through you, the draft plan that's out does not yet include some of those essential kind of services or public services, allowing them in the Greenbelt plan areas. They still only want to have them within urban communities. And again, there's ourselves and Lincoln and Niagara-on-the-Lake that certainly have a concern with respect to that, and we do have fire halls out in the Greenbelt plan area, and it's important to have that in order to meet our response time requirements. So it's a bit of an issue for the Greenbelt communities for sure.
So I trust that staff will put that forward again and,
Yes.
and represent the importance of that. And lastly, the review speaks generally about new aggregate policies within the NEC boundary, and I wondered what those policies might be and how they might impact on our future development on our CAME, if any.
The Niagara Escarpment Plan policies with respect to new aggregate resources, there is policies that do permit aggregate operations subject to an amendment to their plan. So it would go through a full and comprehensive review. Amending the Niagara Escarpment Plan is a pretty onerous process, but they still do consider, providing that avenue to aggregate resources. So that is still something that's in the Niagara Escarpment Plan.
Just by way of comment, then, it would be very important that we put forward again that we get the overlay of the NEC protection on our CAME, because that would impose that due diligence on the developer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Mayor Dave?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just to build on that last point by Councillor Kersey, and I spoke about it at council, I think they outlined that we meet 2 of the 6 criteria, and I think we can meet 3 or more. of the criteria. So I think it's important that we do follow up with that NEC piece. Dr. Menzies' location is quite broad, actually. And the ministry did consider it when they designated the area of natural and scientific interest, the ANSI boundaries. So we may want to say, and I'll talk to staff and at the region as well, that have a little bit more expert. They have a person that's actually an expert on some of this, Mr. Fields. Whether we say, look, you put the ANSI in, you've done all the science on it, let's use the ANSI boundaries. So we did have some feedback when we had the meeting with Natural Resources and Ministry of Municipal Affairs, and they had asked about our official plan and the status of that, and the CAO responded that it's still up for appeal, those aggregate policies by a specific developer. But they did acknowledge that they do have the expertise on it. So we'll have to lean on the ministry as well with the expertise that they have. And you'll recall the presentation that they made in terms of the use specific language, but essentially the cross-section of the CAME is the area that's the most important, and that's the remaining piece. The rest of it has been changed by various developments. But there's that cross-sectional piece that is there, and that's covered by the ANSI. So I think I encourage council or committee to approve this piece in terms of the CAME and protecting that. So I want to echo your comments, Councillor. Good idea in terms of the fire halls. It might be interesting to solicit the input of various insurers. The director, Mr. Chair, talks about response times. Well, that response time is then impacted by home insurance, and it might be interesting to have an ally in that front as well, and maybe talk to them about that they might write a comment to the ministry. So it's not just municipalities, it's someone else that's saying, look, this is a necessity, it's a basic need in rural communities to have a fire hall so that we can actually deal with fires, and that the province should actually include that. The interesting piece is the proposed density and infill requirements. Wow.
Crazy.
We thought that we're already dealing with huge changes to the community, and there's, quite impactful changes that are being proposed. Maybe the director can outline some of that, and Mr. Chair, and also answer, it talks here about have other implications with regard to infrastructure. So just wondering what the director's thinking about when she's saying other implications to infrastructure. Is that road infrastructure? Is that water, wastewater, stormwater, et cetera?
Mr. Chair, through you, certainly the province is putting forward increasing densities in our greenfield areas to 80 persons per hectare for residents and jobs combined, and then increasing intensification targets within our existing built-up areas to 60%. So that does going to have an impact on infrastructure. Certainly from my just high-level kind of overview on it, we know that, for example, the East Fonthill neighborhood, it was approved at a density of 50 persons per hectare. Adding another 30 persons per hectare may affect some of the infrastructure that we've already put in the ground in terms of sewer, water services, and roadways. So I think increasing those density targets will have an infrastructure implication, and may mean that we'd have to be reinvesting back into some of the infrastructure, making some improvements to infrastructure to achieve those targets in certain areas. Exactly where, well, we again haven't done that kind of detailed analysis, but it does have certainly implications to municipalities with respect to increasing these density targets and long-range planning. Now again, these targets are supposed to be met by 2041, so it's something that if we know we need to get there, it's like, how do we get there? How do we plan for it? How do we ensure we put the necessary capital aside in terms of budgeting, if we need to do infrastructure improvements to get there. So it's not that we have to meet these right away first, the first time, but we have to think long-term and certainly develop strategies. So when we're doing an official plan review and update, it will be something that we'll have to consider at that time.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, Mr. Chair, if I might, the director's saying that it's not a requirement that it will be there immediately. What about plans that we've approved or secondary plan areas that we worked on for forever? It feels like, would those be would it be retroactive, or would it be for, I'm just trying to get my head around this, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, stammering a little, and I apologize to you for that.
Mr. Chair, through you. So the language in the Greenbelt Plan says that over the life of the plan, which takes you to 2041, you have to achieve these targets. So any development that's already approved, that can go ahead. And then from a policy perspective, secondary plans, when we would do our review of our official plan, we'd have to be looking at those secondary plan areas, and it may, in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, result in an amendment to approved secondary plan areas to increase the density targets if these targets stay. We're suggesting that in the Greenbelt Plan has identified an inner ring and an outer ring, and the inner ring municipalities are those around the GTA up to Hamilton, and the outer ring municipalities are from the Niagara area municipalities, and that really it is a different type of development here than there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to recognize that it's different, and it's going to take us longer to get there and achieve some of these densities. We don't have things like, the infrastructure in terms of public transit in place and all sorts of other things that are needed to support that kind of density. So there's a lot of work that would be required. But I think in the short term, certainly existing developments that have been approved can carry on and proceed. We wouldn't be taking away any of those development rights. But the next time we would be updating our official plan, we would be looking at where we'd need to change policies to conform with the Greenbelt Plan,
Thank you.
or growth plan, pardon me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, then I call to vote. So we're going to receive this report for information. Direct planning staff to continue to collaborate with the region to provide comments. And further, that the specific request for the removal of 205 Highway 20 West from the Greenbelt Plan be referred to the province for consideration, and that this report be forwarded to the region. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Motion by Councillor King that the Corporate Services Department report on the second quarter revenue and expenditure statement be received for information. Comments on this report? Okay. All in favor of this motion? Okay, the motion carries. Motion by Councillor Akersi that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the Human Resource Policy Report and recommend that Council approve Policy S301-08, Hours of Work. Comments on this policy report? Councillor Akersi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've asked this question before, but I'd like reassurance on this. And it applies to all of the new HR policies that are brought forward as amended. do any of the changes here and in the other policies, could they be deemed to be constructive dismissal by any of our employees?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, they cannot be. In fact, it's really just putting down into policy what we're actually already doing in practice, so our policies are now just reflecting our reality.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Anyone else? No. Okay, vote on the motion. All those in favor? Okay, the motion carries. Motion again by Councillor Kersey that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the Human Resource Policy Report and recommend that Council approve Policy S301-13 overtime. Discussion on this. Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, but I got to ask these questions. I get the whole overtime thing, and I recognize the acknowledgement of emergency hours because that's something that's not necessarily controllable, and we need to speak to that. I'm curious as to why we're singling out event hours as opposed to just recognizing them in terms of overtime and how they'd be paid and how they would be capped.
Volunteer hours?
I mean, no, the event hours,
Oh, I'm
because it just seems to me like we're singling out events as opposed to just, let's go with the overtime policy on a broader scale, a broader picture, that's all.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, and right now, as I drafted these policies, we recognize that we do have these distinct categories of hours, and we were starting to use the terms in every which way, and so it was just difficult to understand, were we talking event hours, were we talking emergency hours? Now, as far as emergency hours go, again, for any overtime, we don't budget for, right? Because we need to, as good business operators, there should be no overtime. We do recognize that based on emergencies within the town, such as water main breaks or snow plowing, we're gonna have this overtime. But that, even historically, we can look at and we can make a reasonable estimate on how much that is going to cost us. The event hours, on the other hand, is something that we've handled differently historically, and that we allow our staff an opportunity to voluntarily sign up for these hours, and their compensation for these hours is done in time and not in dollars. So in following employment standards, we do get them to sign off, so by them just agreeing to work it, they are therefore agreeing to get this in time and not in dollars. So we're having these different categories that it was important for us to just document on paper. So when we talked about these hours, we were using standard language, so we weren't confusing them. Down the road, we've talked about, do we eliminate that altogether? I mean, do we do everything through volunteers so we don't even have these event hours? And it's something that we can aspire to, but I don't necessarily foresee that in the immediate future. So for now, it's just best that we document it, use the right language, so we're all talking about the same things.
Just as a
Yes,
follow-up,
Councillor?
Mr. Chair. So let's suppose, and I guess maybe I'm getting hung up on the word event, but let's suppose that a staff member is required to work 2 or 3 extra hours on a shift. It has nothing to do with a specific event. They have the option to take, they either get paid or they take flex, right? They can offset depending on what the director, how they work it out. Or
Yeah.
explain all that to me.
Certainly, again, through you, Mr. Chair. So again, that's part of what we're trying to get to, is that if a specific employee needs to work additional hours, they should be always talking to their leader in advance and saying, hey, you know what, this particular week, my workload is really high. I'm gonna be working a few extra hours, and through partnership with that leader, they determine, is it flex hours? Flex being within that pay period. Can there be days in the coming week that they can actually leave early or come in later in order to maintain that 35 or 40 hour work week? Because ultimately that's what we prefer to have, right? We don't want to work them more. If it's not possible to do within the pay period, because we don't want this to be dragging on and some sort of charts to be kept. If that can't be done, then we look at their options. And again, that's why an event is something that it could be department specific. So it could be And I'm gonna just use, our corporate services, it could be an audit. They've got an audit coming, so a group of them might have to work late in order to prepare for the audit, and that would be considered an event in the department that would warrant them working extra hours where they necessarily can't flex it, so we need to compensate that for them, and they would agree to take that in, time versus pay.
I see. Okay, thanks for that clarity.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? On the motion then, to receive the Human Resource Policy Report and recommend that council approve the policy. All those in favor? That motion carries. Okay. So a motion put forward by Councillor Papp that policy and priorities receive the Public Works Core Standards Report and recommend that the following standards be endorsed and supported. That the Department of Public Works endeavors to do the following in this order of priority. Number 1, work safely. Through standard operating procedures, Public Works shall strive to ensure all work is performed safely and with accurate attention to health and safety legislation, policy, risk, and training. Safety is paramount. Number 2, work consistently. Through standard operating procedures, Public Works shall strive to ensure core processes are carried out consistently. 3, work efficiently. Public Works shall be mindful of efficiencies in planning and carrying out work. Efficiency is found through continual improvement, and Public Works strives to continually improve its core processes through review, trending, and problem solving. And number 4, work innovatively. In challenges that arise wherever practicable, Public Works shall strive to minimize the common behavior out of identifying reasons why not, and instead maximize, prioritize, test, and implement variable solutions using ready, fire, aim, and tactical urbanism principles. Any comments on this? Oh, Councillor Papp.
Well, I'm very pleased with this, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'm also very interested in looking at how you measure the success and how your staff are achieving those results, because that's going to be vitally important for them, A, to feel self-fulfillment, that they're working safe, they're performing accurately, and that they are, like you say, being efficient. The innovation, I agree, is going to be difficult, but part of it is the innovation is part of the development of the way in which we carry out the work. So if there's methods by which they could, and I've been part of this before, where things are creative and innovative and save money, sometimes, if not at this stage, those employees are rewarded in some manner, shape, or form. But I think this sets a whole standard that tells us that for the general public that we are committed to these types of standards and will be constantly monitoring them. So thank you for that.
Anyone else? Yes, Mayor?
Thank you. Just want to build on what Councillor Papp said. Great work. That's what I've written here. It's great, and great to see all this happening. Again, as Councillor Papp indicated, the milestones I think will be important, and we look forward to the reporting of those milestones as this progresses. But great work. I had a meeting with a resident and the director this afternoon, and the resident was indicating some innovations that perhaps we might undertake, and the director is already on top of them. So staff are already working in that way, and and I think we've seen it in a number of instances. So look forward to further innovation, and just think it's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Okay. On the motion, all those in favor? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councillor Papp that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the engineering design criteria and standard drawings report and recommend that council approve the Town of Pelham engineering design criteria and standard drawings as presented. Discussion?
You go ahead,
Councilor Kersey and then
Um,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try and stay on the high level and not get down into the weeds because I'm going to rely on the expertise of our expert staff with respect to coefficient of drag and sewer pipes and et cetera, et cetera. So I hope you're up on all that and will look after us. I trust you will be. But there are a few things that I'm a little bit concerned about when we talk from a high level. Some of the things, for example, new developments, one of the criteria that you listed a number of criteria and reports that all new development would need to bring forward. And it seems to me that some of them they're all excellent for larger developments, but when you start dealing with smaller developments such as areas of intensification, et cetera, for somebody who's putting in 2 or 3 or 4 apartments, to expect, for example, a traffic study or some of the other studies have become so onerous and so costly that it almost negates the effectiveness of trying to do the intensification and might drive some of the development out of those areas. So I just wondered how these general principles are going to be applied. Are they going to be applied holus bolus across the development spectrum, or are they going to be meted out based on the size of the development, the impact of the development, and who will make that decision?
Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair. These are meant to be a guideline when we're talking about these particular requirements for, say, a design brief. So they're a starting point that's finally written down to say this is what the expectation of the developer would be, completely taking into account what the scale of the development is, and then whenever there's questionable things, particularly traffic impact study, I think it's in there, geotech, that should it be questionable what the reasoning for the ask is, those criteria or trigger criteria are listed in there as well.
Yeah, I saw that.
There will be flex. There has to be flex on consideration of some of these things. We can build it in stronger if it's preferred, but they're meant to be a starting point to say this is what the expectation is, and then they're carried forward case by case with every development application.
I think it would be helpful to make a statement in there that, that these would be applied on a case-by-case basis, and that flexibility would be the theme of the day. We talk a lot about lot drainage and that developments need to present lot drainage plans and all of that, and I totally get that and the need for it and the importance of it. My question is, after the fact, once the lot drainage plan is in place and the subdivision's signed over, who takes responsibility for enforcing that lot drainage plan after the fact? When Mrs. Johns plugs up the swale and causes a backup into her neighbor, who goes out there and takes shots, make sure that the drainage plan is being enforced? Could you speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There is no enforcement at that stage unless there's been something registered on title. So once the subdivision has been assumed, the dust has settled, the commitment between the developer and the town, from that perspective is done. The developer can't control what happens in those sites afterwards. So where there are, say, rear yard swales or side yard swales that require protection, then that's built into the subdivision plan that those requirements be put on title. Because unless it's registered on title when those properties change hands, we don't have the means to enforce changes in grading. We get them daily, the chief and I especially, of people complaining about changes in elevation and work their neighbor's doing and how it's affecting. It comes over to the Drainage Act territory rather than something that would be with the planning or with Public Works for enforcement.
Just as a follow-up, Mr. Chair, so the drainage plan that we forced the developer to put on and the first-time home owners, basically, as they build out that subdivision, the developer takes the responsibility of ensuring that the drainage plan is being complied with and certifies that to the town. Is that now correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is. The intent of this, the overall subdivision drainage is drawn out and strictly adhered to in construction, right through to the point of building, to make sure that that final building lot, when it goes through building application, it's checked against the subdivision plan as well. So at that point, once the developer cannot be held accountable with the town inevitably as properties change hands. So there's a gray area that it's been suggested in the past where I've worked about having requirements, if they're registered on title for anything that is critical or anything that we would like to see enforced in perpetuity, register it on title, and then that piece disappears. It's still difficult to enforce. We do have some of those in town now where we know it's registered on title, but someone has gone and plunked something on it, and we would have to pursue.
You read my mind, Madam Chair, or Madam Director, because, you know, when we're dealing with a build-out of a development, it's a relatively short period of time. But if then that plan that we fought so hard to get and ensure that it's so critically placed and everybody spends lots of energy and money to make sure that it happens, the minute that the developer signs off and we take over, it all falls off the table and anything can happen. So it seems to me in those critical elements of the drainage plan, there should be something registered on title against those lands to allow staff, if indeed we do get a complaint, and all of our bylaws are complaint driven, if indeed we have a complaint, that we have a mechanism whereby we can go back and for the protection of the neighbors that have been insulted, that we would have some way of dealing with that and ensuring that what they thought they were buying, they actually continue to have. So I don't know whether we can look at that and how you would, whether it needs to be encased in this or whether it needs to be a separate entity. I don't know. I'll leave that up to your expertise to take a look at.
Mr. Chair, we'll certainly discuss that with planning as well and what can be covered in the subdivision plan.
Thank you, Madam Director. Yes, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm very, very pleased with this document for a number of reasons. One is, I think, as the director indicated, that it puts down some of the rules, some of the guidelines that have been out there, puts them down in writing. The second is that it updates them, and instead of being from 1974 or earlier, they're actually sort of current standards. One of the things that I'm very pleased with is, you know, the road widths are narrowing, off-lane bike lanes, walking paths, et cetera, which are, I think, key. And I think we need to embed quickly as development comes in. It's sort of the vision and the thing that we're trying to do, especially in the roads for which we have ultimate responsibility for in the East Fawn Hill area. But I think it's important to have some of those in some of the other roads as quickly as possible. And I know council has been looking forward to these engineering standards and drawings for a while. By the same token, you know, we want to hear maybe from the community. We want to hear from those that would be doing the engineering and the building and all of that. So I guess I'm thinking, yeah, we can approve it. I don't know if we need to approve it in principle and use this as the guideline, or whether we approve it and say, let's revisit it and work together with the development community. So, and members of the broad community to make sure that we get this right. Because the key thing about these standards is this is how the community will develop for the next generation. And this is a huge, can have a huge policy effect on communities. We talk about complete streets, we talk about streets are for people, not cars, that there are various uses, etc. So I guess my simple question, Mr. Chair, after all that preamble is, is how do we do both? How do we say, this is what we want, but at the same time, be flexible enough to listen to the community, make sure we get it right, make sure some of these questions that other Councillor Kersey and other colleagues around the table have about this can be addressed. I don't know if that's to the CAO or
CAO, would you like to comment on that?
other members of council.
I would, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur that it, now that we've got the standards into a form that is, pretty much council approval ready, if you will. We wanted, because of the length of time it's taken to put this, it's a monumental task to do this work, and it's taken us a long time to put it together, but once we had it together, I know there's been great interest from council. We wanted to get it in front of council as soon as possible because of all of the pending developments, and to have a clear set of design criteria. Having said that, it is also important to consult with the, with the broader community, the development community, the engineering community, the construction community,
Cyclists, yeah.
et cetera, to get their input. So I would suggest that perhaps this be approved pending a form of community consultation or industry consultation, whatever you want to call it, so that we can have that that input to make sure, like you said, we do get it right. So I certainly would think that that would be something that we could undertake, and then once that process is complete, we can include that as an appendix for council consideration at a regular council meeting to formally approve the design.
I like that.
Okay.
The CAO? So I take it we have to do an amendment to the motion? The motion,
It's as presented, right? Recommend the council approve the engineering
yes,
design.
as presented, yes.
Yeah,
To
I mean,
receive the engineering design.
I'm thinking we almost call a public meeting on it, invite,
Public open houses.
have an open house or two, but at the same time, we want to make sure, like, this is the direction we're going, and we don't want a development that's imminent to slip through and put in, 30-foot wide roads.
Yes.
So maybe Councillor Papp is a solution. He's got lots of expertise in this area.
No, I'm just building on one. Do you remember you and I we met with the developers, we were having that planning document.
Yeah.
We sat around the table. They gave us tremendous input. We were able to achieve a document that was workable for them, and also for them as an educational piece, they began to understand. So this is a tremendous amount of work, Madam Director. I watched this, so I think it'd be worth our while, and I agree, Mr. CAO, to consult with the key stakeholders in a collaborative way in which we can discuss openly, because once this is approved and is set in place, then that becomes our standard of what we expect work to be done at what level, right? And, they got to, forgive my word, but they got to capiche that that's the way it's going to be, and that's what they're going to follow. Or we'd also want to be open to any other suggestions. So I know this word's been used before, but we received this report in principle, and then carry on with a collaborative
Public consultation.
public consultation, Mr. CAO, with the key stakeholders. I'll leave that wide open. So you can, and we know who they are. And it worked, I must say, it worked very effectively with the, what do you call it, the development planning guide tool that we used.
Community have to have an public open house.
Just an open house, and there's all kinds of, we had it was very well done, and the developers came in and gave us ideas on where we could cut corners, and I'm generalizing, but also they began to understand where we're coming from, what type of, because, they say we got guidelines, but, okay, now we've done it, you've done the work, let's find out whether
Get the
it
feedback.
works. Get the feedback. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I see you writing.
Thank you.
I think you have a
Go
motion.
ahead.
I do, and I think just to build on what Councillor Papp has indicated, so I believe the motion is that council approve the Town of Pelham Engineering Design Criteria Standard Drawings as presented. Is that the motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to amend it to strike as presented and put in principle,
Correct.
and that town staff, whoever it is, undertake open houses, workshops with key stakeholders and the broader community,
Perfect.
however that's worded. So for some of those, I'll say key stakeholders, as Councillor Papp indicated, it might be a workshop, it might be a tabletop meeting. For the broader community, it might be
Very different.
an open house and very different, and we might want somebody to make a presentation for 15 minutes about what it means. But I know that there's a lot of folks that live in town that take a huge interest in this. So they might be the members of the Active Transportation Committee, or they might just general public take a lot of interest in it. So we want to make sure that we get the kind of the mix right.
Yep.
But we also need to say, this is where we're going. And so approve it in principle, and then when any new development comes in, hits the books tomorrow, we say, look, this is basically the standard.
Yep.
So I hope that maybe the clerk can massage that, but that's essentially that we approve it in principle and that we undertake open houses or workshops with key stakeholders in the broader community. And maybe the staff at our next council meeting can update us on what a plan might be to do that.
Discussion on the amendment? Yes,
Just
Councilor Kersey?
for clarity, Mr. Chair, in terms of process, once the staff has done that,
Bring it back.
they could bring it back directly to council with an appendix as alluded to by the CAO, and an accompanying report showing where the changes have been made.
If any, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would move the process
Final
forward.
approval.
I don't know whether we need to put that in the amendments.
I think it's understood. I guess
It's
we
understood.
should probably get, as part of this, some information at our council meeting in 2 weeks, just to say,
it's gonna roll out.
here's the plan, here's what we're recommending.
Okay.
Ms. Clemencio, Mr. Chair, will know the key stakeholders in that side of the business, and,
Yep.
you know, others, Ms. Weens will know some others, et cetera, so. But I think it's important to have the broader community involved.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so on the amendment, Madam Clerk, have you got an amendment that you can read us? Okay,
Oh, through a motion made by Mayor Augustine,
yes.
that the motion be amended to strike the words as presented and replace them with in principle, and to add the following, that staff be directed to undertake open houses or workshops with key stakeholders and the broader community.
Okay, on the amendment, all in favor? Okay, and on the motion itself?
As amended,
Oh, I'm
As
sorry.
amended.
on the motion
Oh, as amended, yes. All in favor?
Yep.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you, great work.
Yeah, excellent job.
Motion put forward by Councillor King that Policy and Priorities Committee recommend that council receive the correspondence from T. Nuziato regarding the use of all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, on public roads, and that staff be requested to review the request and report back to council prior to the end of 2016. Discussion on this. Mayor Dave?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This was to go to our July meeting. We
Yep.
ran out of time.
Yep.
I just hope that if this gets approved, that perhaps the clerk can be in contact with the letter writer just to indicate what's been approved and the timeline.
Madam Clerk? Yes,
I think the gentleman was here at our last meeting, and then,
I see.
so it'd be good to kind of close the loop on that
First
communication.
Department will follow up through.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, so on the motion, all in favor? Okay, motion carries. Again, a motion by Councillor King that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the correspondence from R. Stammers regarding speeding on Canberra Road, and that the correspondence be referred to staff for investigation and report. Any discussion on the correspondence? No? Councillor Papp and then Councillor Kersey.
Oh, well, I'm looking at Councillor King. Do we still have the police in,
The, oh my goodness.
you know what I'm talking about, the,
Speed Watch Committee?
I'm gonna call it Speed Watch Monitor, is in the good hands of Public Works. Once, the policing committee was disbanded, Public Works very nicely stepped up to the plate.
so while we investigate this, I also would suggest, which is a self-evident, that we work with the NRP on this, because we ran through a similar series. Do you remember on Foss Road? It was the same type of thing, and then one day they did a blitz, and not arrested, well, they almost did, a number of people, and it seemed to work, but that's what, I've witnessed this, be honest with you, I don't normally, but it seems that it's picking up speed going down to Canberra these days, so, thanks.
Perhaps Madam Director of Public Works could comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can most certainly put this in the queue. We've almost caught up on the speed watch, so I just made a note to myself to bring a report back on the status of sort of all those reviews we've been doing through the summer. But we can get this underway as well.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Kersey.
Canberra Road's long been a racetrack in this community.
Yep.
It's was not only an Indian trail, it's now become a NASCAR trail. And this might be the perfect situation where we apply the ready, fire, aim approach to dealing with this, find some innovative, inexpensive means to narrow the roadway, to create visual cues, to try and slow it down. I think it would be an excellent street to really roll that out and try and see how it happens. We can rely on the NRP all we want. As soon as they disappear, the racetrack is open for business. So I think we need to go beyond that, and hopefully staff will take a good look at that and how we could roll something out that's inexpensive and yet effective.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. I agree certainly with Councillor Kersey and Councillor Papp. And I asked the clerk to include this, it was an email to me, but to include this because of so many folks that have said it to me verbally. So, interesting, again, at AMO, there was a very brief session about built environment and speed and cars and those kind of things. And just to build on the comment from Councillor Kersey, sometimes it is the design of the road. I was in contact with somebody today where there were a number of accidents on a regional road in the city of Welland, and I'm convinced it's the design of the road that leads to those Moyer Road. That's right. So in this instance, if we can undertake some of those, I hate the language. You got to come up with better language, tactical urbanism, but essentially some sort of small changes that we can measure and enact to try to calm the traffic. I was hoping that the line painting that was recently done could kind of be narrower. That's one of the ways, a visual cue, but there may be other things as well. So I look forward to the report, and I would also ask the clerk to maybe be in contact with the letter writer because of the delay, and just to say that we're going to be working on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. If I may just add that I'm of the old school, that you can't beat a cop sitting by the road. I realize that Madame Director has told us before that she has a hard time bringing the police into Pelham, but it sure would be nice if we could see a few more speed traps hither and thither and what have you, because I honestly think that when people start paying in the pocketbooks and their insurance company sends them letters, it does have an effect. There's no doubt about that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so on this motion, receive the correspondence, refer to staff, all in favor? Okay, motion carries. And a motion put forward by Councillor Kersey, be it resolved, this is the one we wanted. Be it resolved that this regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for Tuesday, September 6th, 2016, unless sooner called by the mayor. All those in favor? Sorry. Motion carries.
I could have got you that one at 8:40.
This meeting is over.